tracing system fully working. A powerful image from a weekend of protests.
Didn't even think twice about doing it. It was just an instinct. You know, I didn't see colour. I just saw a human being on the floor.
Whilst many believe this is a symbol of what Britain could be, others argue it remains deeply divided, with violent clashes serving as proof. This morning, Boris Johnson's acknowledged that, saying more has to be done to tackle the issue of racism. He's promising to set up a cross-government commission to examine inequalities in employment, health and education.
And what I really want to do as Prime Minister is change the narrative so we stop the sense of victimisation and discrimination.
I believe our government's ill-suited and ill-equipped to deal with deep problems of racism, as from top to bottom it is riddled with people that have unfortunately been involved in saying racist things.
With a decision taken to cover up memorials to protect them from vandalism during protests, the Prime Minister's written in today's Telegraph, vowing to fight with every breath in his body any attempt to remove the Churchill statue, insisting it would Photoshop Britain's past. He says if we start purging the record and removing the images of all but those whose attitudes conform to our own, we're engaged in a great lie, a distortion of our history. The mass protests here in the UK were prompted by the death of George Floyd in America almost 3 weeks ago. And this weekend there's been a wave of fresh protests there after another African-American man, Rayshard Brooks, was shot dead by a white police officer in Atlanta. Simmering tensions firing up once again. Richard Gaisford. Good morning, Britain.
Well, one of the statues covered up in Parliament Square to protect it from protesters is Nelson Mandela's. He was arguably one of the biggest leaders of peaceful protests and spent decades fighting against South Africa's brutal racial regime.
Well, after almost 3 decades in prison, Nelson Mandela helped end the apartheid system and in 1994 became the first black president of South Africa. And joining us now, I'm pleased to say, is his grandson, Nkosi Mandela. A very good morning to you and thank you for joining us. What do you make of the fact that your grandfather's statue is currently boarded up in Parliament Square?
Good morning, Susanna and Piers, and good morning, Britain. This, for us as a family, takes us down memory lane. I remember in 1984, there was a bust in the South Bank of London that was erected by the Greater London Council, which the former president of the ANC, Oliver Tambo, was invited to unveil the bust. And a few years later, must have been about 4 years, in 1988, I came to visit London and found the statue defaced. The bust had been removed, vandalized. And Madiba was coined to have been a terrorist and a communist. And to us and the anti-apartheid movement at large knew that Madiba stood and championed the greater cause of peace, of democracy, justice and human rights for all. We understand the issues and the challenges that Britain today may be facing, which has been accelerated by the death of George Floyd and the BLM campaign. But as a result, we know that statues, for one, and that of Madiba, are statues that should be able to inspire us and also enable us to pass them on to the next generation to admire and be able to ensure that the future generations are able to understand the people that stood for justice and the freedoms that we enjoy today.
Nkosi,
So
let me just ask you,
today.
because I just want to jump
Yes,
in
please.
there. I had the great honour. I had a private meeting with your grandfather in 2003, around the time of the Iraq War, and he was a remarkably impressive person who lived up to every expectation I could possibly have had. But he was famously a man who, when he came out of prison, you know, he could have taken revenge on those who'd kept him in captivity for nearly 3 decades. But instead, he forged peace with the enemy, if you like. There's a remarkable picture on the front pages of the papers today over here, which you may not have seen, but it's one of the Black Lives Matter protesters saving the life of a white right-wing protester who had gone to London yesterday to protest against him. And he saved his life, literally pulled him from a mob that was beating him up and he thinks would have killed him. It reminded me of the essence of your grandfather, this, and the imagery is so powerful. You know, obviously since George Floyd's death, there's been so much angst and anger and rage, particularly in America. What do you think your grandfather's advice to people would have been about how to proportionally and correctly effect change after the death of George Floyd?
I think more than the racism that we are seeing, we should look at George Floyd's passing in the light of the unraveling of oppressive regimes, and the oppressed peoples around the world are beginning to have a platform and are beginning to have a voice. And this image of a black African man assisting a white British male has been a powerful image which then speaks to us in terms of humanity, to look within. And I think it is a courageous thing to see people as such taking the bait in and saying that we have to get beyond race. It is about humanity. We can't be complicit any longer facing an oppressive regime and witnessing brutality across the world, whether be in America, whether be in Britain, whether be in Australia, Palestine, Western Sahara, and Kashmir. We have to take a stand for justice and human rights for all. And I think...
sorry to interrupt. I just wanted to mention, you know, you're talking about this man, black man from South London, in fact, Patrick Hutchinson, his name is. And as Piers says, his photograph is everywhere. It's so symbolic, as you reflect as well. And clearly you've seen the photograph carrying this white protester. I think it's really interesting, the message, though, that Patrick Hutchinson sends. Because on his social media, he said it's not black versus white. It's everyone versus the racists. And I thought that was a very powerful reframing of the debate in case it descends into a black versus white issue. It is everyone who stands against anything that is racist systemically in society.
Yes, Susanna, we have to call racism for what it is. But it is also associated with the oppressive regimes that have been at the helm of this. You cannot look at racism alone, but you have to look at it holistically as to what has led to such. I mean, if you look at the George Floyd incident, it's not just about a white cop killing a black man. This is what African Americans have been experiencing from the days of slavery, from colonialism, from occupation, from the civil rights movements. This has been the story of George Floyd and the story of African Americans and oppressive peoples around the world. So we have to elevate the discussion beyond racism and look at creating a platform for oppressed nations around the world.
On the question of slavery, the statue issue here began to build up because a statue of Sir Edward Colston, who was a famous figure in Bristol, but had also been an infamous slave owner and slave trader before he became somebody who gave back to the community, as he would put it. His statue was pulled down and thrown into some water. As a result, there then became this sort of campaign to look for fault in everybody who has a statue, including your grandfather, including Winston Churchill, including Mahatma Gandhi. Your father famously used to say, I wasn't a saint, He used to talk about doing and saying things he wished he hadn't done. Winston Churchill was not a saint. He had said some stuff which he shouldn't have said. He held views he shouldn't have held. Mahatma Gandhi, the same, said quite inflammatory and racist things. And yet the totality of their lives, many would argue, in each of those cases, far out